I wasn't really planning to do a segment about this, but there have been so many bad takes coming from, I guess, what we're calling the revolutionary left. That's the non-pejorative term that we've, I guess, agreed on to describe them about the resignation of Bolivian President Evo Morales, that I feel compelled to discuss it because the right is just completely uninformed about Latin American politics. So I really don't have any message for them. But there are a lot of people on the left that are either misunderstanding or just wrong in their conclusions about what has taken place in Bolivia over the last close to 15 years, calling it in completely black and white terms a military coup. So my goal here is to go through the whole story. Hopefully this will be enlightening. I know I'll be called a shill and all of this stuff, but who cares, right? I mean, we get one shot at doing things the way we actually see them. You only live once, and I'm going to do the stories with the nuance that I think they deserve, because that's really what's missing. The problem is there is too much black and white thinking in general in politics. People are either good or bad. The military is either good or bad. Socialism is either good or bad. A politician is either a savior or a villain. And I know lots of people who work in the field of mental health, and they tell me, a lot of the people that come in that I see, they have in their lives all sorts of different things going on that at their root are often caused by black and white thinking about gray areas in life, about jobs, about relationships, about their childhood, whatever. And I believe that the same is happening in politics and specifically with the Bolivia situation. So let's try to put that aside. Let's just all talk like reasonable people. No one's shilling here. Some people may be missing some of the facts. Some people may be coming to conclusions that are tinged by ideology. Let's not make these umbrella black and white declarations, and let's try to actually figure out what's going on. So the Bolivian president, Evo Morales, was first in office in 2006. A few days ago, he resigned at the request or demand of the Bolivian military. And request or demand we can argue about, but it's not actually the most important thing. Why did this happen? A few days ago, there has been rampant speculation about the most recent election being a bogus election. The Organization of American States put out a report saying that the election results were manipulated, including alterations, forced signatures, and wide-scale data manipulation. Now, there is already a debate about this. Well, does that mean the election was bogus, or are these just reports of irregularities like you have in many elections, including here in the United States? But for me, the real story is actually bigger than this. And I want to ask you this hypothetical. If Donald Trump, during his second term, imagine he gets reelected in November and he gets a second term. Imagine that during that second term, Donald Trump changed the Constitution to allow a third term effective immediately, but then also claimed that since the Constitution was changed, his second term is sort of really his first term under the new Constitution. So he should actually get two more. And then during the third term, which is really his fourth, he loses a referendum to allow unlimited terms. And then his Supreme Court justices that he has selected say, forget about the term limits. You can stay as long as you want. Wouldn't we in that situation, as progressives who are for the rule of law, wouldn't we be begging someone to force Donald Trump out? Okay. Now let's talk about what happened in Bolivia. Evo Morales was elected in 2006, and people were excited because there were good things about his election. It's not black and white. He was the first ethnically indigenous president of Bolivia. That's great in a country that has such a large indigenous population. Why did it take so long to have an indigenous president? Fantastic, lovely. He reduced poverty during his first term. He offered a much more sensible and pragmatic version of the socialism that has been espoused by Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro. He invested in infrastructure and development and grew the middle class. Great. But like with many of these Latin American socialists of the last many decades, he's increasingly authoritarian. There's corruption. He was elected to a 5-year term in 2006. He got a new constitution adopted while he was president, which allowed 2 terms. Then in 2009, he called for early elections, won, and said, hey, this is sort of really like my first term because I didn't complete the first term under the old constitution. We have a new constitution. So I should really be able to run again in 2014. It's not objectively bad to change a constitution, but one should not be allowed to stay in office longer than they were originally supposed to because of changes made under their watch. That's what authoritarians do. So this is already bad. He wins that early 2009 election, calls it his first term. So now he's allowed to run again in 2014. And a court increasingly under his control says, yes, he is allowed to run again. This will count as his second term, not as his third, or his first term, not as his second. He barely wins in 2014 and then says, well, let's do a referendum to abolish term limits altogether so that I can just continue being reelected and reelected indefinitely. Voters reject that referendum in Bolivia. So what does he do? He appeals once again to a constitutional court filled with people loyal to him who say, yep, you know what? Running for office is a human right in Bolivia. Term limits violate the human rights of Evo Morales, so he can run again, which he does, and wins in an election determined to have significant irregularities, some characterizing it as completely bogus. So listen, do I want the military to take control of the country now? Hell no. I'm from Argentina. I know what happens when the military takes control. It's bad. Is this a black-white military coup? No. That's an extraordinarily myopic interpretation that completely ignores history in Bolivia for the last 13 years. If an American president did 25% of what Morales did in the election system in Bolivia, we'd all be demanding their removal. You'll hear comments like, well, this all happened because American banking and finance has ruined these countries, including Bolivia. How does that force a president to change the Constitution to remain in power longer? And how does it excuse it? These things are not as cut and dry as the revolutionary left is making them out to be. So my request to you is, don't fall for the black and white thinking. And of course, the revolutionary left will say anyone who is not loudly opposed to this is a pro-military coup, pro-American interventionist Yankee shill. Let's be adults, guys. Give me a break. The world is not black and white the way you make it out. Evo Morales did some good things early in his presidency. He also is corrupt. We are also seeing a lot of the same things happen in Bolivia that we have seen happen in other places in Latin America, like Venezuela and others, when these authoritarian-leaning socialists remain in power for longer and longer periods of time. Now, interestingly, the left and right share the existence of these factions who suffer from black and white thinking. On the right, you have these libertarians and small government people who think their black and white principles tell them everything they need to know. On the left, you've got the revolutionary left who suffers from, a version of the same affliction where they see a situation and they say, oh, yeah, the military's involved, so that's bad. And a socialist is the president, and that's good. And he's an ethnic minority. So that's it. That's the analysis. And anything else is completely unacceptable. You're pushed out if you don't fall in line with that ideology. Tell me all the ways I'm wrong on the facts. I'm ready for it. But let's not play these just completely toxic black and white games that unfortunately are happening among a contingent of the left.